Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today we're going to replace the back glass on the iPhone XR. This back glass has a bigger hole for the camera. With that said, this is definitely a lot easier to do than trying to break off the camera assembly and separate it so then you can replace the back glass. Either way, this should be perfect for everyone, so let's get started. So the tools you're going to need are going to be a P2 driver, a Y000 driver, a PH000 driver, an Xacto knife with this tip on it, a razor blade, a prying tool kind of like this one, a playing card, and a pick. You'll definitely need some heat and some glue to put the new back on, as well as a lot of clamps to hold it in place. And you definitely want to wear eye protection when replacing the back glass. Also, since you're dealing with metal and the back will get really hot, you want to use something like the UV glove. That way you don't burn or cut your hand. With this said, I don't know how resistant to blades it is, so you want to be careful with this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab this placemat so we can make sure all the screws go back in place because there are going to be a lot of screws. But we're going to grab a P2 driver and we're going to remove the bottom two screws. Then what we're going to do is grab the razor blade to lift up the screen like this and use a pick to cut through the adhesive on the sides and on the bottom, and then cut the adhesive on the top. Then the screen's going to fold over to the right side and we're going to push the screen up a little bit and make sure not to tear those cables. Then we're going to grab the Y000 and we're going to remove these three screws along with this metal panel, so then we can unplug the battery. Then we're going to remove these two screws, lift off this panel, and unplug the digitizer and LCD cable. Next we're going to remove these three screws right here. Then we're going to grab a PH000 bit and remove these two screws right here. This piece may break really easily, so be very careful, but if you start with the top screw and then the bottom screw, it should come out fairly easily. Next we want to remove the front sensor assembly, and now the screen's fully off the phone. Now to remove these anchor screws you want a standoff bit, but a PH000 and a flathead driver will work fine. But if you have that standoff bit, I recommend using that. So we're going to remove these three anchors at the top, this one anchor on the right, and this one anchor on the bottom left. And while we're at it, we're going to remove that small camera anchor, and then switch to the PH000 and remove that top left one. The bottom right area could get tweaked a little bit, but don't worry too much about that. Then with that PH000 bit, we can remove this screw, and then we can remove the screws that are holding in the SIM card tray. The bottom one has this little metal piece, make sure not to lose that, and make sure you know how it goes. Then we're going to remove the SIM card tray, and then we can remove the SIM card assembly. Next you want to unplug all the cables you can see, like the Face ID cables and the back camera cable. And then you can remove the back camera as well. Make sure wherever you place it, it's facing down so then dust doesn't get on it. Then we can lift up the bottom portion of the board and it should pop out like that. Next we want to remove the little antenna area, so we're going to remove all these screws. They're all PH000 bits. Then it'll fold down and you can unplug it. Next you want to remove this little black piece, and with that PH000 bit, remove these three screws. There's a little metal piece on the right side, so make sure to keep that in order. Now we can unplug and remove the Taptic engine. Then we're going to remove the screw on the left side of the speaker. With that standoff bit, you can remove these other anchor screws and put those over to the side. Then there's two more anchors on the left, as well as a plastic piece. Then we can switch to the PH000 bit and remove these last two screws. Then with the razor blade, you're going to remove where the microphones sit, including the plastic piece, just in case it does melt when you're heating it up. Be careful with this because you don't want to rip those microphones. Then all you're going to do is carefully lift up this cable from the frame. There is a little bit of adhesive, but it should come out fairly easily. And then do the same thing with the cable under that. Next we're going to try and remove the battery. The top tabs are fairly difficult to remove because this piece is definitely difficult to lift up. But what you're going to do is you're going to be able to lift it up, and then you're just going to pull on this tab like this, and it should come out fairly easily. If it does rip, I'll show you in a little bit how to fix this issue, but for now we're going to remove all the other tabs. Like I said, the top ones are very difficult to do, but it is possible to take them out without ripping them. And then the bottom ones should come out fairly easily. Now if your tab rips, all you got to do is add some heat for about 5 to 8 seconds, and it should just come out fairly easily if you lift up the battery. Then make sure all the adhesive is off the battery and off the frame, and then we're going to try and remove the wireless charging piece. So you got to take off this little plastic cover, and then we're going to grab the PH000 bit and remove these two screws right here. Now this cable is small, but you don't have to worry too much about ripping it. Just make sure you loosen up the adhesive. Now what you want to do is get a razor blade to kind of lift up the wireless charging. If that doesn't work properly, then what you want to do is try and get under the wireless charging. And once you do that, you want to switch to a pick and cut through the adhesive that's holding this wireless charger down. And this is what it should look like if you didn't break anything. Next is the Face ID. We're going to just push the cameras down. It should loosen up out of the frame. And then you can just pull on the cable very carefully, making sure not to rip it. Again, this adhesive isn't that strong. Next, you want to remove this piece up here. They're going to be a PH000 bit for these 3 screws. This bottom left metal piece goes like this, so make sure to keep that in order. And then there's going to be 2 screws on the top right here. Then we're going to grab the Y000 bit and remove this last screw. This one also has a metal piece. You want to make sure to keep it in the right direction. Then we can lift up the cable on the right and remove it. You don't need to add heat, but it may help. Now the second to last thing we want to do is remove this little metal thing that's holding in the camera flash. What you want to do is suppress it a little bit, or else it could fly away. But you want to get it out of the groove like this, and it should lift up fairly easily. Now the last thing you want to do is lift up the camera flash like this, and you want to remove this little plastic piece that holds the microphone. I recommend loosening up the bottom and then loosen up the top, and it should fold over like this. If the microphone goes with it, then you're good. If not, all you got to do is get the razor blade to lift up that piece, like I'm showing you right now. And to protect all of this, we want to use a heat resistive tape, like the Kapton tape. And we're going to put it around the microphone and the flash to make sure that it doesn't move and also that it stays somewhat heat resistant. Now this little piece that connects near the camera, you can remove it if you want to, but I chose to leave it in because it's not really going to get in the way of us doing the repair. So here's the whole phone. I have this organized on a magnetic mat, as you should have been doing this whole time. You also may notice that this is a different back, but that's because the phone that I was originally filming, all of that video got lost. So I'm just going to merge these two together. Now it's time to put on the UV glove and to put on eye protection and get ready to remove the glass. So you want to grab the razor blade, the Xacto knife, and this little opening tool. So to get started, I like using the razor blade, and then I like using the Xacto knife and the opening tool to cut through the rest of the glass, especially the big pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the razor blade on the edges. If you want to, you can pop out this little area right here where the wireless charging goes. This might help a little bit to get started, but I'm going to start on the edges where it's going to be more difficult, so then you guys can see how it is. And I'm also going to start on the bottom, not on the top, and I'll show you how I get past the camera lens in a little bit. So what I normally do is go over the phone to make sure the back is kind of warm, but right now I'm just heating up this little bottom area because that's where I'm going to start. But what you're going to see is it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to get under the glass, but that's because the phone's overall temperature is not hot enough. And now I'm able to get into a little bit of it, and you can see it's still pretty difficult to cut through this adhesive. So what I'm going to continue doing is adding some more heat, and you want to be careful and not add too much heat at one time because there is a plastic frame and you don't want to mess that up too much. But what we're going to focus on is these little small areas because this is going to be something that's going to be easy for the razor blade to remove. And if it isn't obvious yet, the way that I use the razor blade and the Xacto knife in this video is how I'm used to using it. If you're not used to using a razor blade, or you don't know how to be very careful with that, and obviously with glass as well, you might not want to use my method, and you also might want to put on gloves that are cut resistant. I don't have any recommendations other than the glove that I'm wearing, but I will list below some gloves that look better suited for this job, especially when you're using a razor blade. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to use this razor blade until we can get a decent size area to kind of use that Xacto knife. But as you can see, it can be very difficult to do. But even though the space is pretty small right now, the Xacto knife is going to be better suited for this job. So I'm going to switch to the Xacto knife. I'm going to heat up this area a lot. Generally, when I heat up these areas, it's going to be about 5 to 10 seconds. And then what we're going to do is use this to get under the glass and kind of cut through it. Now you can see I've already melted a little bit of the plastic. That's something that should be expected, but also be careful with how much heat you're adding, or else this could be bad for the whole thing, and you don't really want to ruin the frame too much. With this said, the inside plastic is something that you see on the inside, so you won't really have to worry too much about how the phone holds up. It's just recommended to keep everything looking nice. Then, like I said, you want to heat up these areas for about 5 to 10 seconds each, and then it should come off fairly easily like this. Once the glue gets too cold, the back will kind of shatter like this, and little small pieces are going to start flying everywhere. And once you start seeing that after removing a big piece, that just means you want to add more heat. So up until you get to the area where the charging port is, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. Some pieces may come up in full slices like this, and some of the slices will shatter into a bunch of pieces, and you'll kind of have to pick it out piece by piece. Either way, make sure to stay around 5 to 10 seconds. You don't want to add an outrageous amount of heat, but you do need to add a lot of heat. Also be careful about cutting around the edges, because there is a small plastic trim that will make it look a little weird once you replace the back, if you do damage that too much. So like I said, we're just going to heat up the edges, and we're going to cut through this glass and lift it up. And I'm just going to fast forward until we get to the wireless charging. Now, like I said earlier, we're at the wireless charging. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to push down on this. Be very careful. Obviously, you can see I'm using the one with the glove, but essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to shatter it like that. Also, make sure to have this near a solid surface, because you don't want this little metal panel to separate from the metal frame. And what I'm going to do is just punch out these little areas so that it's almost flat. I'm not going to make it a perfect circle, even though it's not really a perfect circle, but you know what I mean. And for some reason, removing the sides of the wireless charging seemed to be the most difficult for me, regardless of how much heat I use. So you may have some difficulty here, but just remember to keep adding heat and trying to cut through it, add some more heat, cut through it, and so on and so on, and eventually you'll get to the top of the wireless charger. And once you get to the wireless charger, removing these chunks is going to be a little bit easier. You can see this chunk is near the back camera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just shatter it right here, and I'm going to remove all the other pieces, and then I'm going to remove the camera glass last. Now the trick is to remove everything up until the little camera area, and you're gonna have to shatter pretty much every piece that is around the camera. This may be a little bit tricky, especially because you don't want to damage the little metal trim around it. So I'm going to switch to a razor blade and then just kind of lift up on the glass so then it does shatter, so then it makes it a little bit easier to remove. And eventually you'll get all the glass out. And then what I recommend to clean up around that area is just to heat up the camera lens for a couple of seconds and then use a flat razor blade to kind of cut around it. Eventually you'll be able to get all the glass and all the glue out, and then you can use like a brush to kind of clean it up and make sure it looks nice. Now I'm going to clean up my table, get rid of all this glass, and then we're going to remove the glue. Now this isn't really too big of an issue because you're going to be adding your own glue, but just in case, I like to make sure it's flat. So just clean up the little metal area and then also the side area. You can kind of see where the glue is. Now you can clean it however you want, but this is how I clean it. I go really in depth because I want to make sure that there's no glue here. Once everything looks perfect, or close enough, what we're going to do is we're going to add the glue to the back of the phone. Now, like I said, this back glass has a cutout for the camera, so you can kind of just set it on there once you add the glue. And this will be linked in the description, as well as the glue. B7000, B6000, all that stuff, it's pretty much the same thing, just make sure it's either clear or black. So what I like to do is I like to add glue around the edges, like this. And then pretty much I place snake on the back of the phone. I don't know if you entirely need to do this, but I still like doing this just in case. And then you want to add some around the camera. So how we want to do this is we want to set the back glass down, and we kind of want to line up the edges and make sure it kind of clicks into place, if that makes sense. Now you can add clamps now, but what I like to do is I like to put the screen on like this, make sure it kind of clamps in, and make sure you don't pinch any of the cables. But this way we can add clamps as if the phone is all one piece. So when you're adding clamps to the top right, you want to push up on the top right to make sure it's lined up to the corner. And then once you get to the bottom right, you want to do the same thing, add the clamp, and the bottom left, add the clamp. So you want to put one under the camera and to the side of the camera, and then one on the opposite side, and then you want to add two on the bottom as well. That way it's totaling 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, and then you want to add some more in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit for 2 hours, but for this video, I let it sit overnight. Alright, so we've let this sit overnight, and we're just going to take off all the clamps. and we're going to clean up the sides if there's any adhesive that is left over, which there most likely will be. And the best thing about this glue is you can clean it up with either your fingernail or a pick. You don't really have to use anything metal. You can if you want to, but I recommend using like a pick or your fingernail. Either way, you don't have to worry too much about cleaning it up right now. What we're going to do is we're going to take off this screen. But remember, the cables are in the phone, so be careful and slowly pull this out because some of the adhesive may stick to the cables. But it should come out fairly easily. And a little bit of the adhesive stuck to the speaker, but we can take that off. Next, we can remove this little capped on tape that we have and set everything somewhat in place. And you're going to see near the wireless charging area some glue coming out, but you can kind of just take it off with your thumb, or maybe a nail, or possibly a pick. It's not really too difficult to do. Just make sure it's somewhat flat. And then just go around the edges of the phone. You shouldn't really have to worry too much about any glue kind of coming out, but some areas you might want to clean it up a little bit. Like this piece up here. But generally you want to make sure it's just flat. If you still have some glue in there, it's not a huge deal. Just as long as it's flat and doesn't affect any of the other cables that we're going to put on here. So once everything looks nice to you, what we're going to do is we're going to grab all the parts and we're going to put them back here. And the first thing we're going to do is put this camera flash and the microphone back in place. We're just going to push it down like this, and then the camera flash is going to fold over like this. And then just look on the back of the phone, the camera flash should line up properly. If not, you might have to move it a little bit, but eventually you'll get it to a point where everything is all lined up. So we're going to put this little metal piece back in place. You can kind of just hook on one side and snap in the other side, and it should look good. Next, we're going to put this antenna back on the top, and we're going to start putting in the screws. We're going to grab the Y000 bit, line up this little piece, which is going to be very annoying to put in. But what I recommend is just getting the screw in there and then lining up that piece later. You want to make sure it looks like this. Again, it can be very difficult to install. Then I'm going to grab the PH000 bit and I'm going to put these two screws up here like this, and then this screw on the left, and then this screw right here. Then we're going to put this little metal thing back in place with the screw that goes into that. It's going to be difficult to put that screw in, but make sure it just looks like this when you're done. Then we're going to grab the charging coil and kind of set it in place, but what we want to do is put this little piece right here. Grab the PH000 bit and put in the right screw, and then we're going to put in the left screw. Next, we can grab this bottom antenna and put it in place, as well as the charging port. And what you want to do is you want to put the charging port in, kind of line it up like that. It's going to be a little bit difficult. I recommend putting in those bottom two screws in first. So what we're going to do is get that in place and put in those bottom two screws. Next, we can line up the microphone, put that back in place, and then put in the other microphone. Then we want to make sure that the charging port cable is under the antenna cable, just by a little bit. Then we can put this little cover over here. It's not really crucial, but I like putting everything back in place. Next, we'll grab this little cover piece and we're going to set it like this. And we're going to put in the anchor screws to hold that in place. One on the left side and one on the right side. Then we're going to grab the speaker, put that in place, grab the anchor screw, put it in the left side, and put the anchor screw in the right side. Then we can put the Taptic engine back in place, plug that in very carefully. I normally use my finger, but for this video I'm just going to use the pick to show you guys. Then we're going to use the PH000 to put in the left two screws, put this little metal cover over here, and then we're going to put in that screw as well. And we might as well put the screw in to the right of that. Then we can put this little silicone cover over there, because why not? Grab the bottom antenna, plug that in, and fold it over like this. Grab the PH000 bit and put in all those other screws. Then we can grab the Face ID module, put that in place, and the way we can make sure that it's lined up properly is make sure that it doesn't fall out. Then what we want to do is move all these cables and put in the logic board like this. It may be a little bit difficult to put in, but once you get it in, you can put in the anchor screw right there, anchor screw right here, one on the top right, and then the bottom left one. And if you want to, we can start plugging in these cables like I did. Make sure everything lines up. Then we can put the SIM card tray in, and then grab the PH000 bit and put in the screws. Remember that the bottom right has this little metal piece that goes like this. Also remember there's only two screws. Then we'll grab the camera, make sure it looks clean, and we're going to set it down like this. And we're going to make sure that the camera lens is clean first. And it looks fine, but once we put the camera in, there is a little bit of dust, and we're going to clean it up a little bit just like we did with the camera flash. And once everything looks nice, we're going to put the camera in Once that's good, we can plug in the camera, and then we can put this little cover over the camera. Then we can grab the anchor screw and screw that in. It may be a little bit difficult to do, but eventually you'll get it. And then we grab the PH000 bit, put in the top left screw. And before we put the battery in, I'm going to change the screen, so I'll speed through that. And then what I highly recommend is replacing the adhesive that goes around the frame. It's fairly easy to do, and I'm not really going to show you in this video, but I have showed you in previous videos. But all you got to do is just clean up the edges, make sure everything is flat, apply the new adhesive, and try to take it off perfectly. It's very difficult to do, especially if you get some aftermarket adhesive. It's not always going to stick properly, but at least you're going to add some type of adhesive to help prevent water damage. Even though changing the back kind of avoids any water resistance. And you can use the battery adhesive, but what I'm going to do is just use regular adhesive. I'm going to apply a patch right here, and then a patch on the top. And then what I'm going to do is just plug in the battery and set it in place. And then once it's in place, I'm going to unplug the battery and I'm going to continue working on the phone. So we'll plug in the top speaker like this, and then we're going to grab this metal piece, set it down like this, grab the Y000 bit, put in those 3 screws, and then the PH000 bit, and we're going to put in these 2 screws. I recommend starting with the top one and then the bottom one. Then we're going to plug in the LCD and the digitizer cable. Using the Y000 bit, put in those 2 screws right there, along with that metal panel. Then we're going to plug in the battery, put on that metal panel, and then put the Y000 screws in, all 3. Now we have everything almost together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up the screen like this, turn on the phone, and make sure everything works fine before I put the screen on. And everything looks like it's good, so we're going to set the screen down, push down on the top, push down on the sides, push down on the bottom, make sure everything's flat. And then we're going to grab the P2 driver and put in the bottom 2 screws. And now everything seems to be working, and we got a new back. And that's it. I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or on Twitter @MattofRWR, and feel free to follow me on the social media listed above. Subscribe to my channel so you can see more videos like this, as well as some review videos. And hit that bell button so then YouTube actually reminds you when those videos do come out. Thanks for watching.